Okay, in this video we're going to be having a look at some factors that can impact the current account, and whenever you talk about a factor impacting the current account, you can then make additional link to how that will affect our level of net foreign debt. So for example, if the current account deficit was to increase, that's always going to lead to an increased level of net foreign debt. Most of these factors we're talking about here, basically what you need to be able to do is link it to how it affects the value of exports and imports. If the value of exports goes up relative to imports, the CAD's likely to fall. And if the value of imports goes up relative to exports, then the CAD is likely to increase. So here's some examples. These are factors that reduce the current account deficit. And I'm not going to be able to explain these in enough detail in these videos. You're just going to have to go back and have a look through and read through them in your own time as well to really get your head around them. But things that will reduce the CAD, things like slow growth and high unemployment in Australia. When there's high unemployment in Australia, it sounds like it's going to be a bad thing, which it is for our living standards, but it also reduces the level of import spending, and therefore there's less debits in the balance of merchandise trade and net services. So if we have slow growth in Australia, we import less and the CAD goes down. Strong growth overseas will increase demand for our exports, so there'll be more money flowing into the balance of merchandise trade because there'll be more credits because we will export more goods and services. We'll export more iron ore because they'll need it for infrastructure. More people will come here on holidays. There'll be more tourism, more education. So strong growth overseas is good for reducing the CAD. A high terms of trade. Now this is a tricky one. It's really easy to say that high terms of trade is bad for the current account because high export prices will mean that people don't want to buy our exports. But the idea behind it is that the demand for these products is quite inelastic, particularly our commodities. So when the price is high, we're getting a lot more money per sale, and therefore there's a lot more value coming in. So if it's like saying we're selling it for $100 instead of $50, there's going to be more credits because there's a higher value of money coming into our current account. So a high terms of trade is good for the current account because for any given volume of exports, we're getting a much higher price. Increased productivity in Australia will lead to reduced prices in Australia, which means we will export more because we're more competitive, and we'll also import less. So there'll be more credits in the balance of merchandise trade and net services and less debits. So increased productivity is good for the CAD. I'll just do all the negative ones, then come back to the positives. All the ones that are reducing, then come back to the ones that will increase it. A low exchange rate. A low exchange rate is a hard one to get your head around, but when the exchange rate is low, it increases credits in the balance of merchandise trade because foreigners want to buy our products. When our exchange rate is low, it is cheaper for people overseas to buy Australian products, and therefore that can lead to more credits because we export more. We also import less because Australian products become relatively cheaper compared to overseas products because imports are too expensive. So a low exchange rate is good for reducing the CAD because we export more and import less. The only negative is that it can lead to more interest repayments. So if we owe, for example, if we owe America $1 billion US, then they're going to want that in American dollars. The interest we have to pay on that loan will therefore be higher because the Australian dollar is not worth as much. But overall, a low exchange rate should reduce the CAD and therefore reduce our level of net foreign debt. Lower labour costs will make things cheaper, and therefore we'll be more competitive. Government assistance. So if the government assistance provides assistance to subsidies, it will help to lower our cost of production as well and allow us to export more. So basically, most of these things flow back to us exporting more. On the things that will increase the current account deficit, if we have a larger level of net foreign debt, there's going to be more interest flowing out of the current account. If there's low overseas growth, opposite to the one on the other side, it's going to mean that there'll be less demand for our exports, and that will hurt the balance of merchandise trade and net services. A lot of these are the opposite. So a high Australian dollar means that we will export less and import more. A low terms of trade means we're getting a lower value for our exports, so there's less credits coming in. Decreased productivity means that we will have higher prices, so we'll be importing more and exporting less. Higher minimum wages means that our prices will be going up and there'll be less demand for our imports because we're less competitive. Increased labour costs is exactly the same thing. Again, another one that's a bit more confusing. Low unemployment rates and high consumer confidence are both likely to increase the CAD because we will import more because we have more money and we're spending more when we have high confidence. These are two factors that will generally increase the current account deficit. Natural disasters will increase the current account deficit because we're more likely, well, we're not going to be able to export as much because our produce has been affected and our prices will go up. And then another one that's quite difficult is a lack of national savings. This is a big one because what happens is a lack of national savings means that when we borrow money, even if we borrow domestically, the banks don't have enough money to fund that borrowing. So they have to rely on the savings of basically borrowing from overseas, and then if the banks are borrowing from overseas, they're paying interest overseas. So the interest that the banks pay is another reason why the current account would increase, and another reason why the current account is likely to be in deficit. So a lack of national savings is another reason. Again, these are things that you're going to have to go and have a look at yourself as well.